everybody, and welcome to Artwork NASCAD Alumni Talks. While our NASCAD community is a global one, and sorry, I was getting a little feedback, excuse the distraction. While our NASCAD community is a global one, our talk and our school today are hosted in Jimuktuk, Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. We are honored to gather, speak, and make artwork here. My name is Molly Cronin. I am the host of Artwork. I hold a BA in art history from NASCAD 2015. And today I'm joined by some esteemed alum by Julie Rosvall, BFA 2019, and Cal Lane 2001. So thank you guys so much for joining us. We are going to be talking today about lace and about the way that Julie and Cal translate lace in a variety of media in their artwork. So thank you guys so much for joining us today. To get us started, maybe Julie and Cal, could you tell us a little bit about yourselves, your practice, and where you're located? Maybe Julie, we'll start with you.
Excellent. I'm Julie Rosvall. I'm a textile artist and printmaker living and working outside of Wolfville, Nova Scotia in the Gaspereau Valley. So I actually am not a BFA. I am an alumni in the sense that I have attended NASCAD. So by the dictionary definition, I am alumni, but I'm not a graduate. So I just wanted to clarify that. So I've been knitting probably my whole life, but really more seriously since about 2003, and been printmaking since about 2010.
Great, and thank you for the correction, Julie. Cal, what about you? Can you tell us a little bit about your work and yourself?
Okay, I live in Putnam Valley, which is an hour north of Manhattan, in the Hudson Valley. So I've been here for over 20 years now, in the same house. I live in the woods, which is really what I crave. I crave the solitude and the silence, and nature, but I also crave the big city. So it's a perfect place for me. I'm in Manhattan all the time, so I get that kind of encouragement and inspiration, but I love to come home and process that kind of information in a more quiet solitude sort of way. Yeah, and that's where I live.
That sounds like the ideal combo.
Yeah.
Well, while I've got you, maybe you could tell me a little bit about your time at NASCAD and how it influenced your practice, Cal.
Yeah, NASCAD was incredibly important to me. I had gone through, I started my undergraduate a little later in life. I was 30 when I started at NASCAD. So I had gone through lots of different occupations and lives before that. And it just took me that long to get the confidence to finally go to school, I guess. I couldn't financially afford it and all that kind of stuff. So when I went from being a hairdresser to being a welder, and then I started NASCAD and became the metal shop technician there, and taught on the weekends. And going to NASCAD, I can't even explain how much it opened my life up. Like it completely changed everything. I mean, I always wanted to go to art school, and I always knew NASCAD was the art school I wanted to go to. It was just, if I was going to go to art school, it was the best, I thought, in Canada. I came from British Columbia, so coming to Nova Scotia was another exciting thing for me, because I was actually born in Nova Scotia, but my dad was in the Navy, so we got transferred back to Victoria when I was 1 year old. So I hadn't been back since then. So coming to NASCAD, yeah, it changed my life in so many incredible ways.
Wonderful. Julie, same question to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your time at NASCAD and how it influenced what you're doing now?
So for me, as somebody who did it as a non-degree student and through extended studies and a certificate program with the Anna Lee and Owens, I think it definitely has been really influential in getting to dive very deeply into subjects. So I have done Intro to Intaglio twice. plus through extended studies. I did Sandra Brownlee's tactile notebooks as a non-degree student. And I think because I sort of was learning on my own for quite a long time and going to people's studios, there was a bit of a sense of isolation. And I felt like I needed to be really deeply entrenched in printmaking for a period of time so I could move forward. So that first time that I took Intro to Intaglio in 2013, that really allowed me to be in the studio, be with other printmakers and other students, and sort of gain a little bit of confidence, rather than just trying, stumbling along in the dark by myself here in the Gaspereau Valley. So I think that really was important to me, that sense of community and having other people to bounce things off of. And doing it more than once. So I did it in 2013 and then again in 2019. And getting the chance to meet different instructors. The first time was with Maria During, who was in her first year of teaching at NASCAD. And so I learned so much, through her, because she was really enthusiastic and had a lot to give. And then again in 2019 with Charlie Young, who I'd known, from 2012, 2011, when I was doing extended studies classes. So it was a great opportunity to really connect with people as well.
That's great. I love the combo. As somebody who's both done a degree at NASCAD and has taught in extended studies, I really value the diverse programs we offer at NASCAD. So that's wonderful to hear. I'd love to talk to you both about lace, what we're here to talk about today. Maybe Julie, while I have you, can you talk to me about what first drew you to lace, both in maybe the construction of it as a textile maker and as a printmaker as well?
Yeah, so I definitely have always been drawn to sort of the structure and the complexity and that sort of the pattern, repetition. I was never going to be a big sock and sweater knitter. It wasn't in the cards for me. I started as a weaver and a spinner, and my knitting sort of progressed beyond my sweater days fairly quickly, because I just like to experiment and play with, I could just knit swatches all day. So I think that was sort of the starting point, but then trying to figure out what I was going to do with that. If I didn't want to knit a sweater or a big shawl, why are you knitting all these tiny swatches? So the opportunity sort of presented itself as somebody who really likes mark making and printmaking in particular. I saw the work of Betty Goodwin, who was a printmaker in Montreal, who printed all kinds of stuff using soft ground etching, so etching on copper, and that sort of clicked for me. It was an opportunity to take those lace swatches and then translate them and use them in a medium that really drew me in. So that was sort of how it all started in about 2010, 2009.
That's great. Cal, can you tell us a bit about how you came to lace? Are you a fan of lace, or how does lace factor into your work?
Yeah, I come from a completely different path to where I started with lace. To me it was a symbol of femininity, which I was playing with. Making work was, for me, is about trying to make sense of the world, for lack of better words. I find making sculpture is this kind of perfect place between the world in your head and the world that you live in. And so my approach to making work is always trying to place together these confusing social ideas in an object, I guess is what I'm trying to do. So lace was something, like what I was talking about, switching from being a hairdresser to a welder, was this contrast. It was almost like a social experiment in its own right. Just how I was treated in the hair salon and how I was treated in trade school. It was super interesting to me, first being pushed to wear makeup and doing the nails and all that kind of stuff, which I totally didn't connect to. And then working as a welder and being pushed into being the sort of butch girl then. Like I didn't want either of that. I just wanted to be natural, left alone. Not as soon as somebody tried to force me to be a certain way, I kind of wanted to rebel against that. So when I was a hairdresser, I dressed butch. When I was a welder, I dressed feminine, just for that kind of, you can't tell me how to dress kind of thing. So the lace became a symbol of the feminine side that I was rebelling against. And then the first sort of objects I was making were these industrial doilies, where I got thick steel and I hand cut them with the oxyacetylene torch. And it partly the process and the technique felt a little bit like a performance art in its own right too, you know, having this big hot flame and drawing into steel and sort of carving it away and corroding it so it becomes this more delicate object. And I liked how those things contrasted, but I also liked how they kind of settled each other down at the same time. What I was thinking about when I did that piece in Nova Scotia at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia outside, the big I-beams I did back in 2001 or two. It has this added contrast of you know, all the sculptors I was reading about and learning about in school were, you know, did all these big I-beam sculptures, and it was about celebrating the Industrial Revolution, celebrating the machine made and the slickness, and still the idea of craft wasn't celebrated at that time. So I was kind of poking fun at that, or at least trying to switch things up a bit. Because I felt like the handmade was becoming more interesting again, because we're realizing how the machine made, the Industrial Revolution is not celebrated anymore. It's polluting the earth. We're sort of, I think, going through a different kind of revolution. And I was trying to get towards something like that, trying to make a harmonizing object.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's so like rich about your work is those tensions between gender and object and permanence and impermanence. And I think, yeah, everyone watching can get a little glimpse of it from in the piece behind Cal also. Julie, I want to ask you also a bit about this, about you know what Cal's talking about, the kind of making of objects, of craft and handiwork. As a textile artist, this is also really relevant to you in making the lace itself, but also there's an element of I imagine kind of like sacrifice or the dichotomy, or the paradox of lace becoming dirty, these pristine, beautiful objects becoming kind of like sullied or changed in the process of printmaking. Can you talk a bit more about the printmaking process and kind of what happens to the lace as it goes through this transformation?
And that's definitely the first question that particularly any knitter who sees the work, that's their first question. Well, what happens to the lace? And it's no longer a garment once I'm done with it, because I have two different processes. I either or often do both, starting out with knitting the piece, starching it with just white glue and water, just to stiffen it and make sure it's not shifting and changing as I'm doing the printmaking. And quite often I'll just ink it and print it on paper directly. So obviously that that ink, in most cases black ink on the lace is, you'll never get it out. You might be able to wash some of it out, and I do, but it's always going to be sort of stiff and not able to be worn again. So the other process that I do is the soft ground etching. So etching the piece onto copper. So putting the beeswax and asphaltum coating on the plate, putting the knitting on top through the press, and then anywhere where that coating has been marred, it etches when I put it in ferric chloride, creating the image that then gets inked and printed. So in that case, something like this guy. So it definitely, the first time, particularly when you're talking about a shawl, the first time I did it, it was a bit devastating because you spend, I think in the case of that first shawl, I probably spent close to 100 hours knitting it. And then to just roll the ink on it, it was just like, is this a good idea? Should I be doing, like, do I really want to sacrifice this? Is it going to work? So there's definitely, a feeling of sacrifice when you do it. But I'm able to wash most of the ink out, and then usually what I'll do is I'll stitch the shawl to paper and frame it to be on display with the print. So they get to be together again.
Right, and then it becomes this sort of transformed object in and
Yeah.
of itself. Yeah, I was curious about those pairings that you do of the print and the object that created the print.
Yeah, I think it's really important to see the two together, because I think that it's really hard to look at the print and necessarily understand what it is did I draw that? Is it a scan? Is it a photocopy? What is it? So people getting to see the shawl on display with the print really sort of brings it home to people, what they're looking at.
Absolutely. Cal, you also deal with this kind of like ephemerality or like sacrifice in some of your lace-based projects. I'm thinking in particular of pieces where you've sifted dirt into the patterns of lace, or where you have used the metal object, the lace object, and created impressions with rust. Can you talk a bit about some of those pieces?
Yeah, those started out as, again, I was thinking about placing technique in a different context, kind of like the torch cutting and the lace making. And I was thinking about how my grandmother used to decorate cakes with doilies. She would put a doily on a cake and sift icing sugar through it and lifting it up. And I kind of wanted to put that in a sort of a dirty, large scale. So I started sifting dirt through lace and pulling it up. And I've been filling galleries with this, where I just start with a big lace tablecloth, and it's like temporary printmaking, continuously sifting this lace pattern through, and then and it has a relationship to mandalas and things. But I've always, because it's decorative, I've always tried to, I wanted the conversation to be about decoration and not it be decoration so much. So it was always important to me to use dirt and not sand or something that is attractive, and try and keep that kind of connection, like sweeping dirt under the rug and this kind of filth. Sometimes the dirt I use is usually local to where I do it. So sometimes there's cigarette butts in it, and it depends if it's in the city. There are times I did do it in Australia and in the Middle East. So those are the only times I used sand, because that's their local dirt. So those did come out as more of a beautiful red kind of color, and it had a very different meaning there. But I love the ephemeral aspect of that too. I like something that can't be bought and sold too. It gives it a different meaning. It's more like a performance and a dance, maybe. I think having the idea that it's going to be just swept up soon gives it a different feeling. I even did it on the streets of Washington, D.C., where I went to every neighborhood in Washington, D.C. and sifted dirt through the streets. And so I got to meet the people that lived in those areas and talk to people, and got some kids to help me do it. And then it rained the next day, so it was all gone. So something about experiencing something, knowing that it's gonna not stay, just has a different feeling, which I really like. It gives a bit of freedom for the process. And then there's some people that would come and go, why would you do this if it doesn't stay? I don't know, why not?
Well, especially in contrast with these like metal works, with these works that seem so kind of
Right.
monumental or like durable, to have that contrast fits with your work in general, it seems like.
Yeah, and I do like that idea of what the mandala, how there's a release to letting it go. Like I've always been a person that doesn't cling to things. I always like to move on and change. I'm a big fan of change, so I think it has that aspect to it too. And same with the rest prints. I mean, they stay around more, but I do like how they're I mean, I deal with two-dimensional things too. Like, my last show had paintings in it, but I still think all my two-dimensional work is more about sculpture. It's more about the materials than it is about paint or anything like that. The rest prints, yeah, it's ends up with this thin bit of steel on canvas. I love this, for lack of a better word, poetry of taking something, a thin coating of something so tough and strong and industrial, and to have it it's like a monoprint. You can't control it either, which is really attractive to me, to put evidence of one of my objects down and let it stain something. Comes out
And
with
even-
this really nice quality.
And even the act of like allowing rust to collect on the object itself, or I'm not sure how that works in the prints, but I imagine there's some also kind of like letting go of allowing rust to happen on the
Right.
sculpture. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I can show you something right behind me. I cut up this giant dumpster years ago for Socrates Sculpture Park in New York, and it's been dissolving in my backyard. It's got ivy growing over it. Oh, there's my dog. But see if I can get it there. So the dumpster I made for Socrates Sculpture Park over there, and I like watching it just deteriorate out there.
The beauty of the decay.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, we all gotta die someday.
Yeah, there you go. Well, yeah, I think thinking about those particular kind of like these 2D works you're both working in, there's a real nice connection where Julie, you're taking textiles and imprinting it into metal, and Cal, you're creating metal textiles and imprinting it into paper. So I know there's a nice little combination of things going there between the two of you. But I'm curious to know, because lace can hold a number of different types of images. It can be sort of just like pattern, like a kind of knit pattern, or it can hold, it can be more pictorial. It can have kind of like floral or other elements. And I was wondering if both of you could speak to whether or not there are particular types of lace or particular images or patterns in lace that you're drawn to in your work. Maybe Julie, we could start with you.
Yeah, I would say I tend to be drawn to things that have more of a structural, geometric sort of look to them. They do make a better image for me anyway. There's a few different patterns that I've done where you can see an undulation in the pattern, that sort of repetition throughout. I find a busier shawl pattern where you have multiple different lace motifs within the pattern. While they're amazing, they don't have that same impact that something that is repetitive and you can see a landscape happening across the paper. So I think those are the ones that I'm definitely more drawn to, and obviously lots of open space. I don't tend to go for florals as much, but I can see the beauty in that and the possibilities for creating imagery, definitely.
No, absolutely. I love that. Thank you. Cal, what about you? Are there particular types of lace or images in lace that you're drawn to in your work?
Um, I've always liked using lace patterns that I appropriate. So because I kind of want to stay in the vein of using it as a symbol as opposed to it being too much about hit lace, I wanted to use the lace patterns that you get from the dollar store, or like the paper doilies, the plastic doilies, all the sort of disposable kind of patterns that you get that are sort of so super cheap. Um, I kind of like that relationship of a sort of a recognizable pattern. I think if I got too into the history of lace or the ideas of lace, I think I would start to it would become about something else, which I trying to stay away from. Because I kind of like to. I think all my other works, I don't always work in lace. Like my last show was a series of weights that I made out of dishes, sets of dishes. So I'd get the old pink floral dishes, they have the large plates, the medium plates, and the smaller plates. And then I drilled holes through them and tiered them onto weights. So I still like that relationship of the fragility and the strength and the gender commingling, and also the debunking of sort of traditional, everything's traditional, what we're supposed to do. Um, so yeah, most of the lace, almost all the lace patterns have been appropriated from dollar store type patterns, except for I did a series of uh, ammunition boxes, and those patterns I took from more of a medieval um, lace and tapestry, because I like that relationship of the medieval imagery on top of more contemporary aggressive war objects.
Yeah, love that. Love thinking about also like the relationship between etching and armor and textiles, and those things all come into play.
Yeah, and I do find it sort of funny uh, how some people want the more personal uh, to be part of my work. Like people have sort of commented about that, but I've always tried to stay away from that too. I don't want it to be about me. You know what I mean? I want it to be about more of a outside of myself. I don't want any personal aspects of it. So when I started doing the dirt sifting lace, I used my mother's tablecloth. She gave me an old tablecloth that she got for a wedding gift years ago. And everybody would connect to that. Be like, oh, that's so nice. But it didn't have any meaning for me. My mom didn't like it. She wanted to throw it out. So, but I always found that interesting where people attach meaning to things. And I think those are the things I'm always trying to push against. I feel like you can create your own meanings wherever it lies. So whenever somebody tries to put meaning on something, I find that interesting. They almost get angry at me when I try to pull away from the personal, like, no, I want it to have heart. But I think it has heart in I'd like to think in a more complicated way, I guess.
No, absolutely. And lace is such a loaded object because it can be related to the bridal, to lingerie, to the kind of like fussy objects we grew up with in our homes. It's related to like women's labor and textile making. It's
Yeah.
very complex, and it hits all kinds of checks all kinds of different boxes, which is what's so interesting
Yeah,
about both of your work.
yeah, that's what I love about lace. It has so many multiple readings on it. Yeah.
I'd love to ask you both a bit about scale in working with lace, because Kyle, you work in these large objects, and Julie, you do these sort of like triptychs or like multiple panel pieces. And I was often we kind of think of lace as this very like fine, small, or at least the knit of it as an object as quite small. And I'm interested in what changes about the material or the object for you in presenting it in such a large scale. Maybe Julie, you could talk to us a bit about your multiple panel pieces.
Yeah, so initially, as I said before, I really thought I was going to be doing a lot of small swatches and just exploring the patterns and printing from those. And as time went by, I got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think the largest shawl I've done is about 66 inches wide, and not terribly deep, maybe 18 or 20 inches deep. So it definitely has an impact, particularly when you put the shawl and the print together. You get two fairly large pieces, as far as scale is concerned, so it has quite a dramatic effect. um, but I think that having those larger objects definitely, I'm definitely drawn to that. I like to see how far I can push. My press does not enjoy the scale at which I'm trying to work. I definitely need a bigger press to keep doing this, but um, I do enjoy that, and I find that you talk about the triptychs. That's one aspect, because I'm working at this scale and trying to deal with paper. When you start to get bigger, 70-inch pieces of paper, when you're one person trying to deal with it and not damage the paper, even just getting around the studio can be a challenge. So I found that actually was a necessity of working alone, was doing things as triptychs, because I can handle the smaller pieces of paper. A 22 by 30-inch piece of paper is much easier to handle. Three of those, one, two, three, than trying to do the 22 or the 30 by 66 or 70 inches long. I usually have to have somebody come help me when I'm doing that. And Bonnie Baker, who's a wonderful printmaker here in the Valley, has been invaluable in helping me troubleshoot those larger pieces. But I really enjoy the triptychs, and people are drawn to triptychs. They really love seeing pieces displayed in that way. It just sort of, people have a connection to them for some reason.
I imagine the kind of pairing of the object and the print and them both at that scale, for maybe those of us who aren't textile artists, who aren't familiar with that work, we can kind of see the scale of the labor a little bit. Is that a
Yeah.
reaction you get from
Yeah,
viewers?
definitely. Obviously, and certainly the general public, somebody coming into a gallery and seeing that work, they are, the scale definitely has an impact for them. But I just was in New York to show my work in February, and so it was the first time I'd shown it in front of all knitters, for an event. And so, you get 5,000 people coming through by your piece, and they've all got a connection to the process. And the jaws that are, the way people come around the corner and they see it, and they're at first they're like, what am I looking at? And then they clue in to, no, that's somebody knit that and then printed it. And that, it definitely was what an incredible experience talking to knitters about that process, and having them see, because they understand the labor, they understand how long it took, and that working with a thread that fine is more challenging than working with just a nice worsted weight yarn. It definitely, and working with silk as opposed to wool, there's all these little challenges, so it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Cal, I imagine you get responses like that as well, working with with these welded objects, with carving. It's clear the kind of like scale of labor, the amount of time that goes into these intricate objects. What can you talk a bit about the scale of your work, and especially in relation to lace and kind of blowing up these lace objects that you do?
Yeah, I mean, that's the scale is very important, because otherwise I feel like it wouldn't have that impact. I wanted the monumental lace. I wanted the arrogant, tough, masculine lace. Uh, and yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with time spent. And that question, people are always asking me that, how long did it take? And I feel like I usually avoid answering it, or I use, the obvious line, it took a lifetime, because I feel like people will judge you positive and negative, and it'll change the way they look at the piece when it comes to time spent. Sometimes if I say, okay, so it took me a month to make this, and some will go, oh, like, and I'm always curious about what that means. So if I say it took a day, what would that mean to you? Is it less valuable if it took less time? Is it more valuable when it takes more time? And I get both. I get some people thinking, oh, why would you waste your time doing that for a month? or why would you, it only took that long, then it can't be very good. Like, you know, so I always avoid that question. And I've learned that I think the mystery of those sorts of things are better left alone, because of those judgments I'm trying to avoid. But scale wise, you know, I was thinking of like, I really, being a welder, I can't imagine what other people who don't do it think about what it takes to build the things that I build. When I was invited to the Sydney Biennale, they had given me 10 shipping containers to cut up in a month. And they just said, that's just, unless I could do like just one little cut on each maybe, but you know, it's not going to be possible. So they obviously felt like maybe the labor part wasn't that big of a deal. But as I get older, you know, now I now can't really make the large scale things like I used to. It takes me a lot longer now, you know, because my back has got problems and things like that. So that's why I'm trying to make, I'm working more with smaller objects these days. And the bigger pieces, I'm going to, at some point, have to get assistance, which I've had assistance in the past, but I'm very much a solo, independent, introverted artist. So I don't really like having assistance. So it's just something I'm going through a change right now of making different materials and different objects that aren't quite so big. And the larger scale pieces, I'm going to have to get laser cut or farmed out to do. But that whole thing too, you know, there's this judgment of who makes it and if it's done by your hand or not, which I have no romance about either. I don't have to make the pieces myself. But as a person who works with their hands, it's how I think. That's the only thing, is as I'm making pieces, new ideas come up, and that's how I move on to the next thing that I make. I have to be making something to work through things to make a new thing. I can't work at my computer, design it, send it out. Like, I find my brain doesn't work that way. I have to get dirty. I have to work on it. So it's going to be interesting because I still crave to make the large pieces, and I'm still working on large pieces. It's just it takes me a few years to make them now.
Yeah, and you know, skill and time are complicated questions when it comes to like making, like, the more experience you have, the more skill you have at something, the time it takes is sort of irrelevant. And I don't think people ever ask painters, like, how long did it take you to paint that? You know?
Yeah, they don't do that. Yeah. Yeah, and I'm just interested in why they ask that. I mean, I get it too, because I feel it too when I see something like, oh, how long, you want to imagine the artist making it, and I understand it, but it's the sort of how I think about the piece afterwards when I have that information I don't like.
Yeah, it's
like
very
the mystery.
complicated. We'll keep the mystery alive. Well, I want to open it up to questions in a few minutes, but before that, I wanted to give you both the chance. I know that you've said you had some images, both of you, or some objects you'd like to share. And if you'd like to now, perhaps we could take a look at some objects you've got or some images you've got with you. Maybe Cal, do you want to share your?
I mean, if I could maybe show some of the newer pieces. I don't know. I mean, honestly, if other people have questions and things, I could bring something up. But maybe, I don't know if anybody's seen the paintings I've been doing. I'll show you a couple of those. I've been working on mattresses. I've always wanted to work on mattresses because I like the different patterns that are in it. And I like the scale of them. They're obviously body scale because we lie on them, and they're old mattresses. So they're all kind of, you know, it's a bit weird, but so I'll see if I can get this to So does that come out?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay, so that's some of the mattress paintings I've been doing. See if I can get the other ones. And yeah, each one has a different pattern on it.
Mm,
These are the, do you see those?
yeah.
Okay, good. So these are the part of the dumbbells I've been making with the dishes, which I've been having a lot of fun with too.
You know those videos where they're like, some person is really lifting something really, really heavy and then they like let the weight crash to the floor afterwards, like when they're doing
Right.
like
Yeah, well,
um,
I did one where it was smashed too,
oh
where it's
yeah.
on the ground and the plates are broken. Like I built this bench too, which was a lot of fun with the doily dumbbells.
Yeah, and the kind of like and the fabric of the bench itself too.
Yeah,
Very nice.
yeah. That was a lot. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Oops.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Cal. Julie, do you have anything you'd like to show us before we jump into questions?
So this, one of the things that is the most important to me in my practice is collaboration with other craftspeople. So this was a project that I've been working on this year with Tina Arsenault of Arkwise Press here in the Valley, and Ellen Tamber of Mule Mother Books in Halifax. So I've always had an interest in with my swatches, having the swatch that I've printed, and then having the text and the chart of the knitting printed letterpress together. So Tina and I have collaborated before on projects that are a little smaller scale, and this year we did this project where I printed the swatches and then she printed the text and the chart of the knitting pattern, and we bound it in, let's see if we can do this, in a book that Ellen created the book cloth and then bound it together. So this is sort of my favorite project right at the moment that I'm pretty pleased with, and it's going to be part of the Visual Arts Nova Scotia mentorship show, which is opening I think on the 28th of June. So it'll be at the Craig Gallery in Dartmouth. So it's just lovely to have the pieces, particularly where knitting, patterns are very much used on a regular basis. I wanted the opportunity to have the swatch and the pattern together.
Right.
So that's sort of my latest bigger project.
Oh, wonderful. Is it like a one-off object, or will it be?
There'll be a very small edition. So that's
Yeah.
the artist proof. There'll be an edition of 9 altogether. I just have to get to the printing part to finish. I had to get it done to take the Newfoundland, the proof, and the rest of them, now that I'm back and so hopefully settled in, I've got to get that done.
Exciting. Well, that's beautiful. Thank you, Julie. I want to open it up to our audience now. If anybody has any questions, they can either pop them in the chat and I can read them out to Julie and Cal, or you can turn on your video and ask questions. So please, if you have anything that you'd like to ask our artists, come on in.
May I speak?
Yeah, please, Dawn.
Yes, I just want to say how much I admire both these artists. I love it that Julie has switched from art craft administration to doing her wonderful work. And Cal, I've wondered where you were, what you were doing. I have your doily, it's one of my prized objects. And I relate to you each in different ways as you do to one another. And I wondered about light coming through an object. It seems to be marking both your works.
Should I talk? I've been hi, Dawn.
Hi, Cal.
I remember you buying that doily from me years ago, like maybe one of the first ones I made.
Yeah, Emily Moan's art auction. It was a bargain.
Yeah, I think about the light a lot these days. At the beginning, I didn't want the work to be overly dramatic and overly theatrical. I thought, because I work with decoration, I didn't want it to be overly decorative. And I thought the light and the casting of the shadow took away from the object too much and made it too fancy, I think. But having said that, I've been totally playing with the light. This piece actually, it's too light out now, but it does have a light behind it and it projects the lace all on the floor. I do have a huge tank out front that has lights in it that my whole house is covered in this big lace shadow at night. So yeah, no, I've been playing that. I've been sort of getting rid of all those sort of old fears I have of and I think as I get older too, I just start to just play more and I just want to enjoy what I make. So try not to stress too much about it. So yeah, I've been playing with shadows a lot.
Well, it's wonderful to hear you and to see you and know what you're doing.
You too,
Keep
Don.
doing it.
It's good to hear your voice. It's been a while.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would say for me, light, that's something I'm trying to figure out how to introduce it more. I think for me, the white space is obviously in the prints, are sort of representative of that importance of the light coming through a piece. But just recently, my installation in Newfoundland, we had a number of my little swatches that we pinned to the wall so that they were about an inch off the wall and lit so that they cast shadows. And that definitely makes me want to figure out how to frame my shawl pieces in a way that maybe they cast shadows more within the framed piece. So that's sort of, something I've been thinking about.
That's wonderful. Thank you for your question, Dawn. I love to think about the theatric potential of lace. Does anybody else have a question for Julie and Cal? Oh, Cal, I meant to ask you about because we've talked about the carved lace and we've talked about the dirt lace, but was there sugar lace as well? Was there powdered sugar on the tires? Can you talk about that piece of it?
Yeah. Am I muted? No. Okay. The sugar, when did that start? I mean, the first sugar installation I did was on, because a gallery in Burlington, Vermont, wanted me to do a dirt sifting piece, but the floor was too much dirt colored. So I ended up using sugar. I think that was my first one. Oh no, that's not true. I did the first one I did was when I went to grad school. I got these giant truck tires and I did a sugar sifting over that, which I really liked because you could see the pattern of the tread and then the white lace pattern on top of that. I liked how the patterns interacted with each other and the sugar falls through the cracks. And then I have this, most of my models that I use, I do a lot of dirt sifting over people. Most of my models I've been using these days and paintings, my husband owns a bar here, so they're all locals that hang out in the bar. So there's this very handsome black man that comes in all the time, really muscular. And I asked him if I could sift sugar over his beautiful naked body. And he said, not without my wife. I went, oh, of course. But it made a different image. It made it more beautiful because it was them embracing. And then I did the sugar lace over all of them. And it came out really, really nice. But I'm always trying to back away from that romanticism part, but I think it keeps seeping back into me though. Because I wanted it to be about the strong and the delicate and the sweet. But it became about something else at that point. But it was still a beautiful image.
Oh yeah, and the kind of the how work changes when you have these different inputs from your collaborators or from your participants.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And I don't pose them or anything. I just say, just lie down however you feel comfortable. That process is always really awkward for me because, I'm not really an exhibitionist or anything. So being around naked people has always been a little bit shy for me, but I'm always surprised how everybody loves the process. It's like going to the spa, being covered in dirt and lace and and I have this lineup of people that want to do it. Everybody wants to be covered in dirt and sugar these days. So I'm doing a series of same-sex couples now, and yeah, it's we'll see where that goes.
And that play of like preciousness and dirtiness, like the sugar becomes dirty because it's on the bodies and on the ground, and the dirt becomes kind of precious because it's patterned and on these bodies. And yeah,
And
just
it,
thinking of
it
the way the
has
materials change.
it's also very morbid too. Like
Yeah.
most of them are just lying flat on their backs and their eye sockets filled with dirt, and it's has this very eerie feeling to it. The first person I dirt sifted was Krista Bennett. We were at a bar and I was in Halifax and I'm saying, "Oh, I have this idea, I want to do this, but I don't know who's going to let me photograph them naked with dirt on it." She goes, "I will." And so she was my first, and she passed away this past year, and I have a hard time looking at those images now, and it's really hard to see those images.
Yeah, lace has all of these. It's a veil, it's a shroud, it's something we do for
Yeah.
babies. Like it's got all of those.
And I'm burying them. I'm physically burying them in dirt.
Yeah, that's very complex. Yeah.
Yeah.
But also wonderful to have that record of that person.
Yeah.
and their
The
willingness.
process is incredibly intimate too, which
Yeah.
is the part that I'm very shy about, having to, I have to not just drape the lace on them, I have to form it around their bodies and then, sprinkle dirt on them, and they have to be perfectly still and quiet. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know if they're miserable sitting there, and I'm panicking because it's taking too long. It's a very interesting experience.
Yeah, a kind of intimate collaboration, most definitely.
Yeah.
Julie, can you talk a bit more about your recent collab? You mentioned that the patterns are in the book. Do you mean like the patterns, like the instructions to create that kind of those works? Can you talk about why sharing that information is important to you?
So, obviously patterns for knitters are an important part of their process. They need those instructions. Obviously there are people who can improvise to a certain extent, but for the most part, knitters use pattern books as part of their creation process. So for me to have the knit swatches that I've printed together with that, both the chart, because most lace patterns come with a chart and a key, as well as the written instructions. Just having them together in one bound piece sort of increases that record keeping of the I feel like every time that I'm printing a piece of lace, I'm because garments tend to be disposable, I feel like I'm recording that for to keep and to save. So to have them together and bound together is a pretty special project for me personally.
It's kind of like archivist bent to your work, isn't there? And this collecting and these record keeping, but also this sort of like almost like anti-archivist or sacrifice that we talked about that goes into the actual recording of the work. There's like something lost there as well.
I know, it's sort of it goes both ways for sure. But and for me also just the opportunity to honor the work of the person who designed that, and in most cases we don't know who the designer of an individual stitch pattern is. People have collected them together. So somebody like Barbara Walker, who has the Treasury of Knitting, Uncharted Knitting Designs, a series of books that are quite famous and used around the world by knitters. she didn't make up all those patterns. She collected them and put them in volumes. So to continue to, collect those things and put them together, in a new volume is a special way to bring the pieces together.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Julie. We're just about done our time today, but I want to ask you guys if there are things coming up or that people can see your work. Where can they go? I put the links to both of your websites in the chat, but if there's anything else you'd like to tell us forthcoming, please let us know. Julie, you mentioned that the the Vans Mentor Show.
Yeah, the Visual Arts Nova Scotia Mentorship Show is running. I think the opening is June 28th, and then it runs from the 29th through to later in July. And there is an artist talk for the 4 mentees in the program, who all happen to have a fairly, have textile bents to them. There's some really interesting work from all 4 of the mentees, and of course the mentors' work will be on display as well. But July 15th, I think, is the artist talk, and the opening is June 28th.
All right,
at the
excellent.
Craig Gallery.
At the Craig Gallery in Dartmouth. Great, thank you. Cal, anything coming up that we should know about? I think you're still muted though.
I have a show in Manhattan, but it's not for almost another year away. I don't have the exact dates yet. I'm supposed to find out today. But I think it's not till next September. The gallery C24, it's on 24th Street, so you can always check in there. I'll let you know the dates if you're in New York. Yeah. I mean, I always have every 2 years about that, have a show in Montreal at Art Year, but I just had a show there, so that's probably not going to be for another 2 years.
All right, well, we'll keep our eyes peeled for all those upcoming projects. Well, thank you both so much for chatting with me today. It was so wonderful to hear more about your work and to get to take a closer look at it. So thank you again.